I feel I have some explaining to do. This episode would have been done a lot earlier if it weren't for the fact that I picked the insurmountable game to get through. Now, it's not that the game's particularly hard, it's hard to talk about. Every time you think you have the script finished for this, or any time I thought I had it finished, I would think of something else. Something else would be brought up to me that add a whole new level to it. And my initial thing was I wanted to avoid spoilers. I wanted to avoid spoiling the ending, and it's just not possible at this point. So I'm going to warn you ahead of time. There's probably going to be some spoilers in it. I'm going to be reading from the script and adding to the script as I go on when I think it's appropriate to add my newer thoughts to this game. But without further ado, this is The Art of Gaming for Bioshock Infinite. There's a line that bookends Bioshock Infinite that seems like it doesn't have any meaning other than to set the mood for the game, and to build a character point between Booker DeWitt and Elizabeth. Elizabeth asks Booker if he's afraid of God. His reply is simple: "No, but I am afraid of you." It's simple, poignant, and yet, at first, the player doesn't think much of it at first. It's fitting, then, that this line is found in a game that speaks about extremism, separation of religion and government, and string theory, especially one that blends them so well together in such a way that the player doesn't even realize it at first. The end product has attracted controversy over its political and religious statements. In order for Booker, the player character, to get on to Columbia, he has to be baptized in the name of the game's protagonist, Zachary Hale Comstock. This upset Christians who hold baptism as a sacrament to their faith. As simple as it is for most people outside, and even some within the faith, to say that having your character in a video game being baptized in the name of a fictional character, this is one of the moments that makes it an artistic masterpiece of gaming. This moment reflects back to Booker's past, his baptism after Wounded Knee that he rejected. Without delving into spoilers right now, depending on whether Booker went with the baptism or rejected it sets the course for the game. I will get back to that in a minute. While the player has no choice in the matter, Booker did. The first time he ran away. The second time he nearly drowns and wakes up in Columbia. Now, when I say the first time, I don't mean his first time being baptized. Because the way this game works, there are several ways that it could have gone. But it just happens, with all the portals being open, Booker, that you play as, depending on how many times you die, is the one who rejected the baptism and avoided anything happening. He happened to, just by doing that one simple act, he avoided becoming Comstock. Don't get upset, I warned about spoilers. If he hadn't become Comstock, he would have lost Elizabeth. The Booker who accepted the baptism was born as Comstock after he lost Elizabeth and took her back.
Is anyone here?
Which leads me to the first thing that I didn't think of at first, and this is unsuspectingly big. The first song played by the Barbershop Quartet is the Beach Boys song, "God Only Knows What I'd Be Without You." There's some very, very deep symbolism there. It's not just that they happen to pick that song. It's Booker's thought, once he gets Elizabeth back, or Comstock, thinking, God only knows what I would be without Elizabeth. Would he be Booker? Would he be Comstock? Who would he be? Only God knows. This is just one of many things in the game that really hints at it. At something bigger that you won't discover until the very end. Now back to the script. Comparing the motivations for the baptism, though, it's simple to see why Booker refused one and went with another. The first baptism was to wash away the sins of his past. Yet, even if God forgave him, he would not forgive himself. The baptism to enter Columbia is symbolic of washing away the sins of the Sodom below, what Comstock sees as America. Yet, if it weren't for a baptism of sorts, Comstock would not be born. He was reborn from the baptism that Booker eventually did take at Wounded Knee in certain time periods. While the baptism in Comstock's name is a religious initiation, it's more than that. It's a way for the people who come to Columbia to connect with Comstock and begin anew. It's also foreshadowing for the player that he will find out about Booker and his past, and his potential future. This isn't anything new in the video game industry, yet one of the most upfront baptisms. Red Dead Redemption comes to mind with this. John Marston is shot by Bill Williamson in the beginning and is revived with the help of Bonnie McFarlane. His past of being a criminal is still with him, but his path to redemption cannot begin without Williamson shooting him. In that sense, it was a baptism of lead and blood and a chance to begin again. Booker's baptism into Columbia, though, takes on a new life when the game is complete. It isn't a baptism of the player, since they know nothing of what Booker has done in the past at the time of a first playthrough, but purely one for Booker. Upon a second playthrough, it is a baptism of the player because not only are they aware of Booker's past sins, but his possible future sins as well. While I'm going to avoid spoiling the ending, I kinda already did, sorry. I'll admit I had to play the last chapter again in order to examine all the information the last 10 minutes and post-credits give the player. There is a lot, and it changed the way I looked at the game. When I chose to do Bioshock Infinite for the first episode of the series, it wasn't because I knew about the ending, nor about Booker's baptism. It's actually because of everything I'd heard about the game being anti-American from a new friend or a few friends, as well as family. On face value, I can see that. Advertisements use Nico Vega's The Beast, which can be seen as telling people that America is corrupt, which is a different discussion for a different person. The flag burning on the front box cover doesn't help things either. But, much like controversial art, one has to actually examine the full game to understand it. Let me be clear on this. Bioshock Infinite isn't anti-American. It's anti-extreme right, Comstock, but also anti-extreme left, the Vox Populi. It's anti-war, but not anti-defense. It's anti-religion as government, but not anti-religion. And yet, the biggest thing it does is that it's also anti-choice. And that's what hurts it. Before I go any further, I'm not saying that the game being anti-choice makes it a bad game. Quite simply, the game is about choices, such as Booker accepting or refusing the baptism, or throwing a ball at an interracial couple, or Fink. The outcome is always the same. Granted, some choices have minor differences, such as getting an item from Fink or from the couple, but it's still the same item, hence the same end from different means. But with the theme of the game being different choices leading to different endings, such as a baptism determining Comstock's existence, shouldn't the choices Booker is presented with have bigger ramifications than implied? Or is the fact that the choices don't matter the point, as we're playing through one of millions of multiple stories? But then, with multiple stories existing, why is the player only bound to one, despite choosing something different? The arguments can be mind-boggling over this, especially when taking into account just how many things could be seen as choices. Do you kill the soldiers who stop attacking you to pray, or let them live? Do you pick the cage or the bird as Elizabeth's brooch? If you think these choices are small, think of the axiom. If a butterfly flaps its wings in America, does it create a hurricane, or is it a typhoon? Depending on the direction it faces, the hurricane or typhoon it creates could hit a different city, thus creating a different effect. Fellow gamers, the bird or the cage may just be the butterfly that creates the hurricane. Choice isn't the only theme, though. Politics play an important role. In the simplest terms, Comstock represents the extreme right of the U.S. government, mixed with the Confederacy of the Civil War. The Vox Populi represent the extreme left, the poor and the oppressed. The Vox fights for more rights than Comstock's founders hold them down. His obsession with his religion, based on worshipping Washington, Jefferson, and Franklin, takes away even the simplest of freedoms, yet the wealthy and some middle class seem content with his rule. Once the false prophet, Booker, is seen, he is hunted down relentlessly, because Comstock knows what Booker will do. More importantly, he knows who Booker is. While we see how Comstock runs Columbia, hiding Elizabeth from the world in her prison to protect her, beyond being a zealot and racist, he is not inherently evil. It isn't until later that we find out who he killed, who he blamed for it, the Vox Populi, and why. When a tear that shows the Vox Populi running a revolution against the founders opens, we see how vicious they can be. Civilians are butchered in the street, and the original founders of Columbia are scalped. The leaders of the Vox Populi even attempt to murder a child. The Vox Populi were oppressed by the founders and punished them excessively. It seems familiar to anyone who studied the Stanford prison experiment, where college students were divided as inmates and guards. The guards abused the inmates while the psychologist, acting as the warden, lost himself in the thrill of the experiment. At the behest of his fiancée and fellow psychologists, he canceled the 2-week experiment after 6 days. The experiment proved humanity's capacity for evil when given power and the means to execute. The Vox Populi and their actions are the product of being granted a vast amount of power at a rapid rate after having no power. Their name translating to the voice of the people is more than a little symbolic of the 99% movement we have going on today. In fact, they aren't the only references to today's economic woes, as the player sees that businesses have lines and people desperate for jobs, but no one is hiring. Now, I want to elaborate further on people's capacity for evil. I read a story the other day about an artist she's a performance artist who stood still for I think it was 13 hours or so, and she had a few items out. Guns, knives, tarot cards, food, water. And at first people were nervous just looking at her, talking to her, some trying to give her food to see if she would eat, some taking markers and marking on her body. By the end of the experiment, she had several cuts on her body. One person grabbed the gun and acted like they were shooting at her. The gun was loaded. And one person put the gun to her head. Only one other person who saw this grabbed the gun and pushed it down. After the art show was over, she got up, got dressed, and as soon as she started moving, people walked away, fearing confrontation. Their power was gone. Now, with the Vox Populi in this game, killing everyone they see, that's even just remotely involved with the founders, if the founders started taking control, either they would have started a war, or it would have dispersed completely because they were afraid of the conflict. What's really interesting is you see the police fighting back, but they're overwhelmed by the Vox Populi. If the founders had an army as big as the Vox Populi or bigger, it would have been quelled easily. Possibly. There's always a chance that it wouldn't. Look at some of the battles any country has gone through. But I find it interesting. They have this power now. What if it's taken away? Then they have fear. What's intriguing about the two sides is where Booker and Elizabeth lie. Right in the middle. By the end of the game, we see the capacity for evil is still within Booker, but only if he wishes it to be. His actions are brutal, contrasting Elizabeth's pure actions, and then corrupting her to the point where she wants to kill Comstock. Her reasons aren't political like the Vox Populi's, or desperations like Booker. Her motivation is simply revenge for the torture he put her through. But then, we see an alternate version of what Elizabeth could become. One who destroys America. Even as she does this, she regrets it, and helps Booker to stop his world's Elizabeth from becoming like her. It's also important to note that Columbia is not America nor the Confederacy, but something of an amalgamation of what the two sides would be depending on who won the Civil War. The North would see Columbia negatively because of how other races are treated, but the South would see it negatively because of the lack of rights and freedom. Religion runs everything in Columbia, and if you do not worship Comstock as a prophet, you are a sinner and must be punished. They want to punish America for sinning, and in several possible realities, they just might. Despite the actions of the two main characters, the game views things from the middle, telling the player that both sides could be equally bad. In this turn, they also have the same capacity for good, should they choose to use it. The player may agree with them, or the Vox Populi, or even Comstock. But in the end, the result is always the same. We may never know what lies behind the other doors, or what would happen if we choose something completely different. What we do know is Bioshock Infinite opens the doors to several debates about our politics, rights, religion, and our fates. We can take comfort in knowing that we have the freedom to translate the meaning of a game in our own ways, such as I have. If you do want to find your translation, play it all the way through. That way you'll know how it will end. Or will you?
Sometimes I see something amazing, and I pull it through. There.
Good God. I don't suppose you've got an airship in there?
I don't think so. But there is. There is something.